In this video, we will be going over the assembly instructions for a 20-foot Harkness table. Here is how it will look when fully assembled. Included hardware is dominoes, draw bolts, and 2.5-inch screws. Additionally, we will have these balance legs for initial setup. Tools required will be a 7/16 ratchet and a square bit drive. Here we are setting up our first table piece, the front of the table. With a nice clean blanket on the ground, lay it face down. Next, we are going to grab the associated leg with the start of this table. All legs and tables are stamped with numbers that correlate. Here you can see setting the leg down and it'll slide right into its location. Look for those numbers highlighted here. You can see we started with our second table. So this has a 6, which will correlate directly with the 6 on the leg here. Each number is unique. Therefore, each number should match up appropriately. 6 here, 6 there. Next, take screws and hand tighten them in so that you can register with the existing pre-drilled holes. This is important to register the legs in with the table. Once they're registered, you can go ahead and screw all the screws into place for each leg. For video purposes, we did not attach all the screws, so we skipped a couple here. You're going to want to attach all the screws. You can see there's 2 more holes to his left. You're going to want to get the screws in there. And 2 more holes there to his right that he didn't do as well. And then 2 more on the side there. At this point, it is good to take a look at the leveling feet and raise them up so that they are just under or just above the leg. Here, the 2 of us are rotating the table up. At this point, make sure to have the balancing legs nearby, as one person will hold up the center seam there, and the other person will take that balancing leg and use it to hold up the table. As you can see, those little blocks register right where the draw bolts will go in, and make sure it's nice and secure. You also may want to use 2 to really level it out. We decided and went back to use 2, would make it easier. Here we're putting the dominoes in each slot on the seam. It takes 9 dominoes for each seam. Again, we used 2 legs to start this one off, just as it would be a little bit easier and flatter to make that seam go across. Here you can see on the seam there's a number 5 in this case, number 5 on either side there, just in from the edge. So we found the next piece of the table with the appropriate number right there on the seam, number 5. You will also notice there was another number on that second table piece on the cross beam that was a 7. We're going to match that 7 up with a 7 on the next leg. Grabbing the next leg, we're going to flip it on to the table, lining up the numbers on the leg to the table. As you can see here, there's a 7, there's a 7. This leg assembly actually gets shifted over so that underneath 7 kind of disappears. You want to register the screws into their appropriate holes to find the legs home. Here you can see the 7, the screw being registered by hand on one side. And then if you go to the other side and register another screw, it will square it up. Again, there's a 7 on this side as well. Each piece is numbered on both sides for the leg structures in the table. You can go ahead and screw down the legs in all the screw holes provided now that it's registered. And you're going to flip this one so that the seam, in this case 5, registers with its other number seam 5 as well. You can double check this and make sure they're stamped the same number. At this point, it can get a little tricky depending on the seam. You know, here if you start one side in first with the dominoes, at one end you can see the guy on the far side started the seam first, and then you can kind of work down to each domino and slot and slowly slide each together. Some will go in easier than others. They should all go in decently well. This is why we use 2 legs, stable legs, to get the seam set up first. You might need to push down on the center, again slowly working those dominoes in. Once they are all registered, you can give it a good push, one man on each side, and it will go right together. Those dominoes will be supporting that seam now. At this point, now that those 2 seams are together, you can remove the support legs. One person will need to lift up on the edge while the other person just works that support leg out. Those support legs can then be put to the side to be used on the next table. Now at this time, if you look underneath the table, you're going to want to take a draw bolt and draw bolt that seam together. We just did 2 on each seam on our way down, and then we go back later and add additional draw bolts to really get everything tightened up. Now we're on to our next seam, which in this case is 6. Again, this is table number 2. So we're on to seam 6. Putting those dominoes in while we're looking for the next section of the table. Looking for seam 6. It's easiest to place the seam on the far side of the table so that when you rotate it up and over, you'll be sliding that seam number 6 right into that other seam. Here, this is the center leg support. Here, we've got 8 that's registered also with 8 on the table. So we're going to go through and find screws and register the screws into their screw holes, and there we go. See, there's a 6. That 6 will be flipped over, attached right to that seam. We got that leg screwed down, the leveling feet in the right place, and now we're flipping it over, and we are going to slide it right into those dominoes. And again, each seam is a little bit different. Some may go in a little bit easier than others. Here you can see we kind of had to work it in. Just like that, it's there. Now we're on to the next one, number 7. Seam number 7. We found the next table, and we found the appropriate leg. That leg we put down, and we are looking at leg number 9, which will match up with the appropriate number on that tabletop. So again, we're taking the screws and we're sliding the legs into the appropriate spot and hand putting those screws in to register where they go. Once one screw on each side is set by hand, you can go through and add the rest of the screws to make sure that the legs are attached nicely to the top. You can see they do overhang this one here in that last video, and that is designed to be that way. Attaching the rest of the screws, and we're flipping it over here and working that dominoes in. Sometimes you really gotta muscle those in, but once they're started, they will go. It just takes lifting and maneuvering. sometimes. So we are on to our last seam here. This is the very end seam. So we found the appropriate number 8 that will match that other number 8. And we're putting the last leg structure on here. Same deal, the numbers will match up. And you register your screws by hand. And then you can attach the rest of the screws through. Everything is pre-drilled, so if there's any question, just find the appropriate holes there. Number 10 is matching up with the number 10 on the legs. Got it all fastened down, secured, and we're going to flip this one up and over and slide it into those dominoes. Working one side first, and then slowly working down the line, slides those on. You may use a soft blow hammer and a rag or a block to flush up the edges as needed. Do not hammer straight onto the wood. Now we're going through with the rest of the draw bolts and tighten all those draw bolts to each seam. There is 6 draw bolts per seam. Get them all nice and snug. And that will tighten up each seam and make it nice and strong. While under the table there, you can notice there's a bunch of stop blocks with felt pads. They all have numbers. Each number corresponds with a shelf. We're looking at 28 here. So we're going to go find 28 shelf. They are stamped on the very end as well as the underside of the shelf. That will correspond with this 28 stop block. There is the stamp 28 on the bottom of the shelf and the stamp on the back of the shelf. The shelf will be slid in with felt pads up on the shelf and then felt pads on the apron there, and it will slip right through there in each corresponding spot. Once aligned appropriately, it should slide in perfectly and be held by the runners. Each table gets 18 shelves. Place each shelf accordingly to its numbered slot. And congratulations, the assembly of the 20-foot Harkness table is complete. Huston Company would like to thank you and hope that you truly enjoy your Harkness table. Please reach out to us with any questions or concerns at all.